support. But we're going to start now. You can all turn on your cameras. Let's see your beautiful and handsome faces. Don't be nervous. And okay, awesome. Thank you. Awesome. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Naija Comm's first virtual event, Netflix and Chop. My name is Princess, and I'm your moderator for this evening. I'm so excited to have y'all here because we have so much that we're going to discuss, so many different topics, purposes, stigmas within the Nigerian community, and so much more. But first, I just would like to thank everyone for being here. Naija Comm wouldn't be where it is without all of your support, of course. We appreciate the time, the effort, all the support. And I would like to remind y'all to be please respectful of your panelists, yourselves, and others, and of course me, your moderator, for throughout the evening. On our panel today, I would like them to real quick, I don't know, they should be pinned, but if they are not, I would like them to really quickly just introduce themselves.
Cindy, you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, my name is Cindy. I am the founder of my own podcast marketing agency called Essence of Sin. But I'm also the talent booker for the Strong Black Lead podcast and occasional bespoke with talent. And I'm also the current producer for Therapy for Black Girls podcast. Keep it simple.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ebony. I work on the comms team at Netflix, supporting the product and technology organization while also supporting our interactive initiative, which sits in the middle of content and product, which is a really fun area of the business. It's exciting just because it gives the chance for me to work with content and with our product leads, which is really fun. So really excited to be here, and thanks for having me.
So we are so happy to have both of you here. And we're going to start off with a Q&A portion from the audience. Oh, I'm sorry. We're going to start with the Q&A portion from the panelists. And then from the audience towards the end, if you have any questions, you can enter it into the chat towards the end or let me know. Or you can use the raise your hand icon, which on the laptop should be at the top towards the right-hand side. And if you are using a phone, it should be located under the more options for all our phone users if you would like to ask the questions directly through the chat. So with that being, excuse me, I'm so sorry. With that being said, I'm going to start off with the first question for both of our Netflix guests today. If possible, how would you say you discovered this position that you were in? What inspired you to work in this position?
I can start just because I occupy an interesting space as it comes to Netflix because I was primarily just brought on to work on the podcast. So the role kind of found me just based on my experiences in the podcast space and my background just with working with talent of kind of all different levels, starting, from music. Some of my early internships, I worked at a recording studio, so got to meet a lot of, celebrity kind of talent. And then in some of the other shows that I worked on in the podcast and YouTube space, I just have a knack for talent. So I think it's one of those things where the role found me. And at the time, the person who was putting together the Strong Black Lead podcast for season 2 needed that booking support. And I came on board and provided that. So I'm not there full time, but I'm more so, I guess, like a talent liaison when the opportunity is there for the podcast and Strong Black Lead.
Oh, that is amazing. And our other panels?
Sorry, what was that? I didn't hear you.
Oh, I was asking, how did you discover the position that you're currently in, and what sort of inspired you to work in this position?
Yeah, so I know it's not the most fun answer. It's kind of similar to Cindy. The role found me, but I will say how I got into working in communications. I feel like communications is in some form or some way, storytelling has been a part of my life for a really long time. As a kid, and this is going to make me sound really crazy and weird, but I'm just going to say it. As a kid, I was really obsessed with Barbie dolls almost for a really long time, like too long. And I was obsessed with like creating these really weird and wild storylines for my Barbies. Like they would have 5 husbands, they would have like so many kids. Like I was just so obsessed with creating these stories for them. And so when I look back at like the very beginnings of kind of when the seed was planted, I think this curiosity of like telling stories in really fun and creative ways has kind of always been there, but the channel has just looked differently. So as a kid, it was Barbies and imaginary friends. I'm an only child, so I don't have any siblings, so I had to get creative. And then as I grew up, I started to find other channels for that storytelling. So it was like working for my high school newspaper and being an editor, working for my college paper. And then later, once I realized after a few internships that working in the media industry was just not for me, or at least not in the way that I thought, just because there wasn't a lot of writing that took place when you work in magazines, which is what I was interning in college. I pivoted and decided to work in PR because we would be fielding so many pitches from PR, like for talent, PR for a company, and my internships. And so I was like, well, it sounds like they get to do a lot of creative like storytelling and coming up with these ideas, and they still get to work in the industry, but just in a more roundabout way. And so that's when I decided to make the pivot. And I continued to work in PR from that point forward. And now I just working in product comms. I know that product is also like, as it doesn't sound that interesting, but I promise it is, because I find that like product is usually the backbone of a company, especially a company like Netflix that was founded in Silicon Valley. And now we're an entertainment company, which is amazing, but the technology is what powers the content that is in your homes every single day. So it's really exciting to come up with really fun stories to kind of tell how that is, and bring that creativity that I've always had as a kid into my current job, which is really what I thrive in.
That is amazing. I wish I didn't think what I wanted to do. I felt like it was, spot on, but that's not the same way for everyone. So, with that being said, just to sort of counteract, did either one of you, have any doubts, about pursuing this particular career? Were there any like family members who were against it? Any personal reasons? Were there, any seed of doubt, honestly, where it was like, is this really for me, type of thing?
I can go first. We can just keep volleyball.
Directing.
I do recognize that, being Nigerian, especially like in our culture, it's kind of like there are 3 pillars of like the ideal like career path, which is like lawyer, doctor, or engineer is now in there as well. So I do think that there's just like a pillar of what careers are deemed as like viable for you. But I count myself really lucky that the doubt that I felt about my career never came from my parents. My mom was always kind of a very she's like maybe the most like she's Nigerian, but she's like the most anti-Nigerian person ever. Like she always bucked at tradition and created an environment for me to really explore like what I wanted, just because she was really into media and she wanted to be a singer, and she never really wanted to follow, I think, one of those core 3 pillar like careers in our community. And she really encouraged that in me as well. So I count myself very lucky. I understand that's not the reality for most people in our community, but especially young folks. But I do feel like a tide is changing, especially with organizations like this that are creating environments where we can all kind of hear about other career opportunities outside of what we've been accustomed to. But on the topic of doubt, I will say that I did experience a lot of challenges along the way of becoming a bit more grounded in my career. And much of that was just because of, I think, needing to find the right way to channel what I'm good at. And I think that's why it's super important to really take some time getting to know yourself and getting to know what your skill set is. And if the version of the career you had in your mind is actually a fit for what your gifts are and where you shine. And that was really tough for me. So for example, if you work in PR, you know, working at agencies is usually how you get your start. But I hated the agency environment. I stayed in it for like 2 years and that was it. It was just not for me. It's super hierarchical, very political. It gives a sorority kind of vibe, and that's just not where I thrive. I can't like be creative and be distracted by stuff that has nothing to do with the work. So I found myself having to pivot to go in-house, where you just have to do that a lot less. And then also I like to be involved in the day-to-day of the business. Whereas if you work for an agency, you can kind of sit in the back, or you're not as involved in the day-to-day. You kind of just send the ideas over to your client. And if they want to do it, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine. But I like to be involved in the day-to-day. So I think what helped me navigate those doubts was being very sure of like, what are my gifts? What am I really good at? And do I need to pivot? Do I need to not think so linear about my career? And do I need to figure out what other ways could be the best channel for what I'm good at?
Yeah. And in terms of, I mean, at one point I was going to be a doctor. So I'm the oldest of four. And I think it was one of those things of the scope of what was possible is what's presented to you. So it's like, you can be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, pharmacist, like whatever. But for me in particular, very similar to Ebony, like I feel like I've just been obsessed with story. Like I was constantly reading thousands of books all the time, and like reading anything I can get my hands on, and making up stories and fairy tales and, you know, dramas, comedies, like all these different things. And I definitely had more of a gift and an inclination that just landed me in the humanities. And so I think some of my like doubt was planted in myself because I thought I wasn't living up to this expectation that was set out for me. When really what those careers, when you really take a look at why they're the ones that our parents kind of choose or want us to be, is because they're the most stable and they're the most kind of lucrative across the board. No matter where you move, like you're going to need a doctor. You know, if you have contracts, because even me as a business owner, I am sending contracts, I'm reading contracts. You need a lawyer. Someone needs to read it. And I mean, I went to exactly one semester of law school, so I can kind of navigate a little bit. But at the end of the day, I don't think my parents really were against me moving into the humanities, because or communications, PR. I don't even know what to title it, just because I know that at the core of it is story. I know that it falls within media, podcasts. It's all storytelling for me. And they recognize that talent, and they're just really excited that I've been able to do something with it. Because at the end of the day, that's all they want. They just want to make sure that I'm able to do something. Because the work ethic is there. It's been instilled. You know, I've always studied hard. I work hard. But at the same time, they recognize that I'm a different person. And I've been able to kind of carve out my own path. And if there are any doubts, it's usually coming from myself thinking, ooh, that might be a little ambitious, or I don't know how I'm going to do that. But let's see, let's try and find out, is it possible? But overall, I think it's starting to really trust yourself and kind of marching in that direction.
Well, that is a great thing to have, especially, you know, if parents aren't or family members aren't backing you up. It can cause a lot of additional stress.
Yeah.
That goes a long way.
Yeah.
But just sort of going back off of what Ebony said at a point with her only working in the agency for 2 years, are there any other times where either one of you have felt you worked in specific spaces, especially corporate spaces, where not only it lacked diversity, but it just wasn't it for you? And what was the main issue working with in those spaces? How did you work through it, and how did you solve the problem, and what advice would you give to anybody who is in that space at the moment?
Okay. So my turn, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So how did I navigate those spaces? I think I consider myself very fortunate to be adaptable by nature. And that has served me well across the different spaces. But I won't lie to you and say that every single role I've had has been a comfortable role. And so usually how I guess like I get through that is by focusing on what it is that I want to get out of it. So early in my career, I thought I want to work in PR and I want to work in books because I like books. So let me find a book publishing company. And I worked in the PR department there, and it was too just siloed, and there wasn't enough room for me to actually express my creativity or do the thing that I find that I'm the best at, which is working cross collaboratively to kind of see a bigger picture in order to tell, I guess, a more cohesive story. And so this was probably like in 2012 or 13 or so. And so social media was something that was like growing, and there were opportunities for authors to really start making a presence there, and having that tied to their PR campaign. So I would go over and talk to the marketing team and start trying to figure out like, what are we doing like to do this thing? And they didn't really like that because it was a more traditional space. And so then I found myself just being really frustrated. And eventually I was like, I know that I can't do this. And so I left, and then, found another thing to do, which was, I took my LSAT, so let me go to grad school. Went there for exactly a semester and realized, yeah, I know that I'm not going to be a lawyer. And the thing that I want to do in law school is essentially work with creatives and be an advocate for them, and be able to like have them protect their IP and their copyrights and all of those things. But at the same time, I know that I can, I guess, be an advocate and be able to help people usher their stories and protect their stories in a certain way outside of law. And so I moved on from that. And so I think for me, it was always knowing what discomfort is going to be comfortable enough for you to get the outcome that you need. And then also knowing when it's time for you to just move out of that space. And that's something that I've been drawing so much on, especially on this like entrepreneurial journey, since I started my company May of 2019. And so it's pretty young, it's pretty new. But within that, I love being able to work on all different types of projects and take all the different pockets of knowledge that I have and apply them to unique and creative spaces, and allowing independent creators to better tell their stories or better access and get the attention of the people that they need to encounter. So yeah, for me, it's knowing when, it's almost like knowing when to quit and really starting to lean deeply into your own inner strengths, and trying to find all your different options along the way that kind of spark, life and creativity for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with especially the point on like always feeling empowered to leave. That was like maybe the main thing my dad drilled into me coming up in my career. I would have to say, before I kind of get into what my advice is, that I've experienced racism in the form of like microaggressive behavior every place I've worked. So I think there, as a community, we have to not accept it, but recognize that there is going to be some version of the same problem everywhere you work. Mm-hmm. And so like, I love the point that Cindy made about like figuring out like what is tolerable and what's non-negotiable for you. Yes. And being very firm in that. Like, and I think that comes from knowing a few things. So one, like she said, what is your North Star? Like you should always come into the job knowing exactly what you're trying to get out of it. Like what skill set are you trying to develop? What projects do you think you could really pull off at this place that you wouldn't be able to do somewhere else or in your current job? Like really having a very clear goal in mind for where you're working. But you also should always know this for a fact is that you are the asset. Like always remember this, like you are the asset, you always have options. And when people know their worth, they're able to stand firm in what they're willing to not negotiate on. And then also what they're willing to tolerate in order to get whatever they need out of this job and bounce. Because again, you know your worth. So you should always feel empowered to leave and take ownership over your own career. So I would say that's the next thing is like, you need to determine what are your non-negotiables and what can you tolerate. So like if you have non-negotiables in a work environment and it's impeding on your ability to be successful in that role, and you feel like you can't stay in the job long enough for it to not impact like your mental health, then you should feel empowered to take ownership over your own career and bounce. Like you don't owe them anything. Like you can leave, you're the asset. So just always remember that. And then another thing that I felt gave me some peace of mind is keep everything in writing. Like always protect yourself. Like have things in writing. Like if you have a conversation with someone and it's a little hostile, like you need to follow up over email, get the conversation in writing, and just always keep things in writing and have an audience so that you have witnesses. And then lastly, I think this is super, super pivotal, especially in the workplace if you are a person of this diaspora, is that you need to find your people that you can trust. Like this is like so vital. And it's important to your success in the workplace. Like you need to know, okay, who are my allies? Sometimes they don't look like you. And I think you have to be open to that. Like you have to be open to the fact that the people who are going to have your back, who are going to speak in the room when you're not there about how well at the job you are doing, that they will have your back and they will protect you. Because I think having allies and finding your people in the workplace that you can trust is key to longevity. It's key to your success. It's key to also maintaining a really great reputation that will follow you wherever you go. So you should probably spend the first 6 months of the role finding those people and building those relationships. And then also making sure those relationships are level skips, like way above you as well, because I think those are ways that you can also pivot if this is a place that you want to stay at, but maybe the team that you're on isn't really great for you, or your manager is not that great. Like really being strategic when you're there so you can get everything out of the job that you want. I would say those are my top tips for sure. As you can see, I've dealt with some.
I was like, got it. Because I've worked at a lot of smaller or mid-sized like teams and companies. So like often like those opportunities don't exist. But that's not to say that I didn't have like allies in those spaces who have also helped me on like this side of the journey and this side of the path. Whether that's like through actual introductions, through recommendations, and also being candid with them and being like, I think that I might be done here. Mm-hmm. And then being like, yeah, you are like, or they're going to do something to like almost force your hand so you understand, like, I think you've hit that point and I would love for you to kind of like grow beyond, because that's ultimately what everyone wants is for you to be successful. And so part of that is you owning, like Emily so eloquently said, owning your career path and really trying to be a champion for yourself, even when people aren't being that same champion for you.
Absolutely. And I would even say, kind of to your point earlier, like, what's your personal best? I think we know what that means in the context of like at like when you're an athlete or when you are like an athlete doing any kind of sport, like you know what your personal best is. And like I think in your career, you should know what your personal best is. And once you've hit your personal best consistently at a place, or you feel like, okay, I need to hit my personal best in this area of development, in this area, in this area. Once I've hit that and I'm working in an environment that I'm like, this doesn't really jive with, you know, and doesn't really bring out the best in me, then you can leave and you should feel empowered to. I personally like to leave before I'm left. So I will bounce before that could happen to me, but that doesn't always happen. But irregardless, I think that's having the level of discernment and ownership over your career to really own every aspect of it, despite what the environment is.
Yeah, so those are a lot of great points and a lot of great tips, but I do know that, you know, for people like me who are still just, you know, fresh out, still, you know, trying to find their footing. I know with Ebony, you had previous communication roles with Twitter and Lyft, and Cindy, you have previous marketing roles at Lululemon and Quest Nutrition. So how did you both stand out from the other candidates when you applied for these roles? Like, what did you do? You know, just like some quick, you know, tops that, you know, you feel helped you in the processes.
That's a really good question. I feel like, let me try and think about the jobs, I guess, that this is most relevant for. I would have to say Lyft was maybe the tougher interview. And that's because I hadn't really worked in product before at that point. So I really had to get creative in how I explained like why my experience would help bring a whole new like approach and way to doing that work, but still achieving the same goals. So I think you really have to look deep into your career, look into what proof points you have, especially if you're looking to do a shift in any kind of way. Like in my case, from an agency environment for like CPG companies like Pampers and Dove Men, like not tech, not product, and definitely not a startup. I had to find a way to spin this, like my experience working on Pampers to being relevant for Lyft, which is like, at the time it was a startup, it wasn't even public yet. And what I did was I kind of drilled down I simplified my career. I tried not to overcomplicate what I did, and so that it could be applicable to whatever. And I think that's key, is when you look at your career and when you look at your skill set, you'll find it's actually a lot more adaptable than you think. You just have to simplify it for people and make it applicable, like really deeply understand the company that you're applying for as well. So you're able to find those proof points that resonate. And I think once you're able to do that, they're able to make sense of why you're the best candidate for the role. I think another thing that I did is I was like hella strategic with how I applied. I like back when I was applying at the time aggressively for my job at Lyft, I knew that just simply shoving my stuff into a company's like application, like receptacle, was just not going to work. So I applied for LinkedIn jobs where I knew that the hiring manager or the recruiter for the role had posted it, because usually if you apply on LinkedIn, they'll see the application. So I was very strategic in how I applied, and then also what skills and what projects that I did in my role would be most relevant for the role. And I would even go the extra mile and sometimes reach out to the recruiters. I would add them on LinkedIn. Even if I wasn't really ready to jump, I would still add them. So at least I was in their network as they were sourcing for roles. So I think you just have to get strategic. You have to turn every rock over. But that would be my tips for, like, I guess, applying. But I have more tips for just generally like how to stand out as well. But I'll let Cindy take over.
Yeah. So I fully agree with all of those. And ironically, like that role at Lululemon was a hybrid role. So I was actually in store. I was folding yoga pants. But because of the way that they as a company structure your time, they allow you to do other things within the like scope of the business that help the business. So I was putting together photo shoots with our local like ambassadors. I was doing like email marketing, and I was like running our Facebook group and like planning kind of like local and community events to kind of start to get a feel of the type of thing that I want to do in marketing. and, you know, reading and learning the technical like terms and taking classes on like Google Analytics so that I understand what it is that I am doing. But that role at Lululemon actually was the role that allowed me, when I moved here, to be able to apply. Well, actually, Quest, that one of their recruiters reached out to me originally for a role that was entirely different than anything that was in my what I thought was my skill set. But she liked me. She realized that my experience was applicable to like marketing roles potentially that they had coming up down the pipeline. They just didn't know when they were hiring for it. And so it just became, just follow up with me in about a month. Like, I still need to check and see if we're opening it up to actually be applied for, if it fits within our business needs. Because they were still growing at the time at Quest. And so I followed up exactly the way that she told me to. And she was reminded, she called me back in. I interviewed for technically 3 different jobs at the same time, because she saw within my resume the potential for me to do something in their marketing department. They just might not know what that role is going to be called just then yet. And it ended up becoming like an entry-level social media coordinator role. But because of the spot they were as a business, they had this entire like media vertical, which was all about story, and it had nothing to do with Quest bars. And everyone else was having a really hard time getting anyone interested in it. So it was kind of like this ugly stepchild that they handed to me. And so what I did with that opportunity was, okay, if this is what you're going to have me work on and what I'm going to be evaluated on, I'm going to make it the best possible thing that I can based on the things that I know that I'm good at, which is getting people excited about something, being able to tell a story, being able to relate to people on an individual basis. I love community. So I was like, I'm just going to build a community around this. And I didn't know that that was technically a role that could be eventually hired for, which is like a community manager, right? But it's something that I essentially created along the way. And because I knew the ethos of the company was very similar to that of Lululemon, wherein they value entrepreneurship, they value contributing good ideas at any level, including the fact that I was like, well, the media property you gave me is hosted by the president of this company. Is it possible for me to meet with the person who's executive producing this so that I can just figure out why they're making this and what is it for so that I can market it better? Got that meeting. And then after that meeting, she was like, okay, wonderful. You need to meet with Tom, who is the host, also the president, CEO of the company. And it's my second week. So it's not being afraid to take those small like opportunities they give you and make them into something where it's like you kind of have to pay attention to me. And that I think was very much pivotal for me in terms of my career. And I think for the most part, most of the jobs I've gotten have been through maintaining relationships, and then also being a person that delivers, because ultimately that's what people are looking for. So even if they're like, I need someone to, you know, put together a photo shoot, right? Go figure out what that means, right? Like, I'm sure you know someone, you have kind of a good enough idea of that. And so maybe it's like, hey, like I can be your PA on a Saturday and see what that's like and figure out how you can repeat that until you get like the skills or enough of a foundation that you feel confident enough to apply for a role and grow into that role.
Okay. Thank you so much. Oh. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to make one more point because it reminded me of something else.
Perfect.
But over like when COVID was at its height, a friend of mine by the name of Fana, she started this organization called Here to Help, which is just a resource for those who lost their job or college students who needed advice on how to break into the industry since it was really, really tough on new grads. And one thing that I said consistently to all of the folks that I mentored was exactly what Cindy said, which is pretty much that you should not be relying on a job description to define your role, that you should really be trying to create opportunities in the role to really let your gifts shine. Because if you think about it, job descriptions are a generalization of what the role needs. It's like it's very foundational, but it's not prescriptive. So like you shouldn't rely on it to define what you do in that job. And oftentimes your longevity is dependent on you not relying on that JD to define your role.
Yes.
You should be creating opportunities and work streams for yourself because that's how you make yourself irreplaceable. Like if you leave, now there's that gap because you just created all of this work for yourself that created a dependency in the business. And now you leave and it's going to be hard to replace you because not everyone has that mentality of like, not letting anything but themselves define what the opportunity size is. And so you should have that foresight of like, okay, that's what the JD says, but this is what I'm actually going to do in this role, in addition to what the JD says.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, and those are both great points. Thank you so much for those. I know Cindy pointed out how with Lululemon, what she did throughout the day and also just in general, and Ebony, you sort of pointed out some of the things that you did with work and everything. What would you say very briefly that your workday currently consists of, and in your opinion, what are the pros and cons of those roles? I know y'all both said they're very, you try to expand yourself or make yourself, irreplaceable, but what would you say are those things?
My day-to-day varies, just because I am sort of kind of a freelancer business owner. I provide like consultations. So some days that's what it is. Other days it's putting together like decks of materials for things or researching for the podcast, pre-interviewing, finding talent, coaching talent, crafting the like script that we're going to use for a podcast episode or a panel. And sometimes it's just straight booking or like writing up so we need these things, these deliverables, like what's the timeline, the deadline, and like project managing that process through. So it definitely varies day to day. It's something that I love because I realize that I thrive a little bit on just variety. I used to say that I thrive in chaos, but I think it's like an organized chaos, perhaps, or it's organized in my mind. And so I like the ability to be flexible in that way. And so my day-to-day definitely varies. But I will say that one thing, if you are a freelancer or work on various projects at the same time, is figuring out how to build within your day, like those beats to breathe, or like creating this like a schedule that allows you to do the things that you need to do. So like for instance, I prefer to do calls in the afternoon if they're more of like one-on-one calls or like new business or consultations, just because that's a time when I am better focused on the speaking aspects and the listening aspects, and I'm not thinking about like 1,000 different things. Or I do them very early in the morning. Might not be the sharpest, but it's less distractions. And I also work across time zones, so sometimes that's just when it's easiest. But I always try and block off like a few solid hours that are in my mental peak for difficult work. And so that usually is around like 11 to like 2 or 3, because that's just when my brain is finally like sharp, ready, and I'm much more okay, depending on what project I'm working on. Because if it's a project where I'm expecting a lot of inbounds, I make sure to clear my day in the opposite direction. So do all the like heavy lifting super early in the morning or later at night, and then reserve the day for responding back like rapid fire to different vendors or different like talent teams, publicists and like managers, being able to answer my phone and everything. So yeah, you get kind of creative in terms of how to manage your time in that way. So my day-to-day looks different every day.
Yeah, I'd say it's the same for me too. My day really depends on like what's coming up. So our team, our product team, they do a lot of tests. We do a lot of like A/B testing. So at any given moment, a test could be rolling out on the TV team or on the mobile team or insert any team that we support. And so we have to kind of prepare like comms plans and statements. And I will say that our team has been prioritizing being more external facing. So meeting with reporters is like key to my day-to-day. And then if there's like a product launch happening, I like to work months in advance on those. So right now, my time has been very dedicated to projects that are coming up in the next several months or next quarter, and just making sure that all of the building blocks are in place so that that launch or that whatever is happening is going to be successful. So that looks often very cross-functional, meeting with my colleagues in other countries. So similar to Cindy, working across a lot of different time zones, having to stay up really late to meet with our APAC teams and having to wake up really early to meet with our EMEA team. So it depends what's happening. But I would say my day-to-day looks different according to what's happening in a quarter. But I like to kind of plan out the year we as a team like to plan out the year so that we have an understanding of like what's coming up, so we can plan accordingly and stay organized. So it's a mix between internal meetings and reporters and meeting with them.
Wonderful. So just for our last question of the evening, considering COVID has affected some people in multiple different ways, what do you think you've learned, and what are just some like core tips that you feel would help, or what you would tell college students and recent grads, especially during this time, considering at this moment they're the ones who are the most impacted with everything going on?
I would say that during this time, I've definitely learned not to be too hard on myself. It was, I think anytime anything is happening in the world, it's easy to pass it off as not really having an impact on you, either mentally or otherwise. And I actually started my job at Netflix like right when I think I had maybe 2 months of non-pandemic time, and then month 3 the pandemic hit. So it was really tough to find time to create, to build relationships, which is just really core to working in communications, especially at an organization like Netflix virtually. So that was really tough, but then also just managing like what was happening in the world and how it was having an impact on my confidence in the workplace, and being new to a job and having dips in productivity and creativity, and having to manage through all of those things while also still being in a high performance culture. It was hard. So I needed to like not be so hard on myself, because I think I had some words that and thought patterns in my brain that just weren't true and weren't the reality of how I was actually performing for folks. So I think something I learned really the biggest lesson from last year was definitely not to be too hard on myself, but also not let the channel for my gifts validate my gifts. So in this case, like the channel is my career, and that should not be validating what I should already know to be true. So I think for a lot of folks, especially as you're a college student or you're just a new grad and you're just coming into the workplace, it's very easy to let your self-worth and your value as a person be tied or tethered to your career. And I have to say, like, it's a lesson that I learned late, but that I hope other people that I can talk to can learn early, which is that your job can never define who you are or your value or your worth. You are worthy of being in this space or in this job or of having these opportunities simply for being who you are, and no one can take that away from you. and no one can validate that for you. So you shouldn't be looking to your job to make you happy or to make you feel smarter or to give you clout. Like, you don't need it. Like, you are worthy and deserving and important simply for being a human being on this earth. And so I think like that is something I had to learn really heavily, so I could start to decouple like any messages in my brain that said, because I'm not productive, I'm not smart, or because I'm not productive, I don't deserve to work here. Like, none of that is true. And so I would say like that's maybe the biggest lesson, and maybe the most important one, especially as you're at the start of your career, because it's so easy to get wrapped up in it. And I made most of my mistakes in my career because of that. So that would be my biggest advice.
I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that one, definitely. Cindy?
So very similarly, it's had its ups and downs for sure. One of the things that I feel like I always try and remind myself, especially in the types of work that I do, is there is a person on the other side and you truly have no idea what they're going through. And so grace is something that I extend to both myself and to people on the other side. So I am not the person who's going to follow up with you like in that 24 hours, or I sent something at 5 p.m. on a Thursday and I'm going to ping you Friday morning. No, like, unless it's that serious and unless there's a reason to, or it's like, hey, like, I'm just shooting you over an updated copy of your itinerary. We just finished booking it. No need to respond, because we all feel expected to respond to everything and to be part of everything. And just reminding yourself that sometimes that's not necessary. The other thing I feel like that I was prepared in certain ways for the pandemic is that I was already kind of working from home and building relationships outside of the organization. Because as I mentioned before, I am not a full-time employee in-house at Netflix. I'm more so project-based and tied to various things with Strong Black Lead. And so that could be putting together, like, reaching out to all the talent in the middle of a pandemic and in the middle of, protests and some of their homes being really close to some fires, to do the UPN like reunion video, right? The announcement video that is this point of joy for so many people. And it's also a point of joy for them too, but they're also still going through the same stuff that we're going through. And so being able to extend a deadline or being able to try and like be flexible. So that's another tip that I feel like is always be flexible. But also at the same time be realistic. So when it is down to the wire, it's like, this is the final date that we need something, and like, let me know if that is possible. Otherwise, that is totally okay. Please take care of the things that you have going on at home. I know that you want to be there and participate and contribute, but that's okay too. And what was the other part of the question? I realized that I just want to make sure I answered it.
No, I think you answered it. That was pretty much advice. So thank you guys so much. I loved hearing what y'all had to say. Those are amazing responses. And so now we're going to begin the Q&A portion of the event. We're just going to take a quick about like 10, 15 minutes to take some questions. The first person I saw that had their hand up, I'm so sorry if I butcher your name. I'm ashamed. I am horrible at this, even though I'm Nigerian. Adwa?
Yeah, it's Adwa.
Adwa, thank you so much. I'm so sorry. But
my question, I guess, would be mainly towards Cindy. I currently right now work in influencer marketing and sometimes wonder how transferable that would be if I ever want to get into casting directing or talent booking or talent relations, and just wanted to know your perspective on that.
I think it's really transferable because, to be honest, this would be technically Strong Black Leads, like season 2 of the podcast was my first like official talent booking type role. But the skills are transferable for any type of relationship that you're building with the person who's managing the talent themselves, if they're the ones who you're reaching out to. And so more and more, like, influencers are some of those talent. So if you are able to communicate effectively with them, manage the expectations, being able to deliver and follow through on the things that you promise to them, I totally think that's a transferable skill. It also depends on the project, and you need to also get really used to rejection by way of either silence or just a straight up no. And that's also part of the process too. And I think your career currently is also very much preparing you for that.
Awesome. Just a reminder, after your question is answered, please click the icon again to lower your hand. And then next we have Israel. Israel?
Hi, sorry.
Oh. Okay, you're fine. I just wasn't sure if you heard me.
Okay. This question is kind of directed. Well, I don't know. I don't know who's going to answer it, but anybody who's got tips to share. Basically, whoever is trying to get into acting here, what advice do you have for them? Or like in sense of like direction on how to get started into that?
Do you want to take that one, Cindy? You work more with talent.
Acting. So I don't have a ton of experience with that, but I think for that, it's also making relationships with directors and writers, because they will be the people to cast you in some of their first films potentially, or some smaller projects. Saying yes to things is definitely very much a part of that, I think. Unfortunately, I don't have a ton of experience like on screen myself. Like, I've done small projects with like being in the background or a commercial or something, but it was more so because I was like, this seems interesting and I want to help. And hopefully now I've made a new relationship or been able to connect with someone that I may be able to help later on. Yeah, so I'm sorry I don't have more, but I definitely think a lot of it is like taking classes and like really working on your craft in that way and networking in that way as well. Because, acting classes kind of hit both ends of the spectrum, which is working on your craft and meeting other actors so that you find out about some of the different opportunities or their agents or what things they may be going to that are open, because I think that's still a lot of how those things happen in that space.
Thank you.
Just to sort of bounce back, I know I'm not a panelist, but with acting, I don't have a lot of experience either, but I just started my first technical, like, biggest acting thing I've ever done. But I would say, someone in the chat also said it, a lot of networking. I know this is also weird. I found out about it through Twitter, but on Instagram as well, they do have a lot of, for example, like with modeling, they have Instagram pages where they will post upcoming events, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Tryouts, I guess, would be the word I'm looking for. And so things like that, open cast calls and stuff like that, I would say are the best way. Thank you, castings. Thank you. Are the best ways to start off on that. And then next we have Rafia.
Wow, you said my name so perfect.
I did. Thank you.
So it's so easy.
Just having to hear that.
I enjoyed you ladies tonight. I'm not really sure how I lucked up on this, but I'm grateful for all the great information you all shared tonight. Um, I wrote a film that is Nigerian. I did a lot of research, and all the actors that were in the film. It's just short, called House of Terror. It's going through the film festivals. There was one scene we didn't get to finish, so I am actually I'm doing that last scene because I think it would be more impactful for the responses for the film festivals. But my question is like, with the Netflix, I have my here, Beneath. We're gonna shoot the feature, and Cindy or whomever can help me. We're gonna shoot the feature. The director, I don't know if you ever heard of Demaraya. He's the film director. He's Nigerian himself. And not a director, he's a cinematographer. I directed it, sorry. But he is a director. But I just wanted to know ways of getting my film to Netflix. So I see it happening, but it's just like, I know I need an agent probably or a lawyer. Do you guys know any other avenues or any help with that?
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't help with that, but I know that like typically if you want anything option, you definitely should look into getting representation. But I unfortunately can't accept any submissions.
Yeah.
But I would definitely look into getting, like you had mentioned earlier, some representation, getting represented by an agency. And then from there, I would say most of the agencies have relationships with our content team at Netflix.
Yeah, I will co-sign that as well, because I'm not part of any type of pitch process in that way. And so that is your best avenue, is to find an agent and kind of move it through the process that way. And I'm not sure if there are like other like open kind of things, but if you find like other writers groups, perhaps they usually will have like an idea of like what agents are looking for talent to represent, or if they particularly love their agent, because your relationship with your agent is super, super important, because they need to understand what your vision and the things that you want to do are. I can speak from the booking side of things, because for some talent that you may think, oh, did they not reach out to them? It could literally just be that their representation didn't know that this was the type of opportunity that they were interested in. So it's always a back and forth relationship that you're building with that person. So I think trying to see if you know other writers who have maybe had something picked up or greenlit, and finding out from them like what that process was like with their agent, or if an agency is currently looking for new talent, because they always kind of have their eye and their ear out for that, because that is their that is their livelihood at the end of the day.
Right. Thank you. I guess I don't know if anyone knows of any agents that are like really easier to get the attentions of new writers. I don't know if anyone knows off the top of their head any, because I have some people who I am talking to about everyone has their own walk on how they got representation from. Some people say they got it from, that I talked to, got it from screenwriting contests and things of that sort. So I'm just trying to figure it out. But I don't know if there's some that are like easier to approach, or if you guys know any that you recommend or anything like that. Okay, I just have to keep on plugging away. But thank you.
I think I could be more helpful, but that's all I currently know myself.
No, you did your best. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. I hope you do get that figured out as well. For our last two questions, we're going to have Victor and then Izine, and that'll be it for the night.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
Okay.
All right, thank you. No, I know I've talked to a couple of you, but really a lot of value. I really appreciate you guys putting this on. I think it's very helpful. So my question, I'll try to make it brief. I have a 4-part mini series that I've drawn up the plans to. I've written everything pretty much to it. What would be the next steps? I mean, it's not, I have an entertainment company. I'm not niche specific in the film industry. I mean, I'm connected, but what would be the next steps as far as, looking for funding, getting it to, people that, like, if I have the screenplay, but I needed to get drawn up for, obviously cinematic purposes, so I can get it in, like, onto the Netflix platform, what would be like the process that I'd go through for something like that?
I unfortunately don't work on the content team, so I'm not sure. I'm not even sure where you would need to begin. But I know, similar to the advice that was shared earlier, I think having representation, I can guide you through that process, and even like networking with other people who are showrunners could probably be the best way to get some tips on how to navigate that.
Okay. Yeah, I see. I mean, it's something that's, out of my sphere. So just, like spitballing it out there, but I definitely like to, get that content out there onto the platform because, I think it's helpful to just get, positive material out. But
Absolutely, and good luck. Hopefully
thank you.
get some help, and it sounds like a really fun project though.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Victor. And then lastly, we're going to have Isn't.
Hello. Thank you for hosting this event and taking the time out this evening to speak to all of us. I would just like to say I was so excited when I first heard about this event because Netflix is literally like my dream company. I'm going to get there one day along this process. But in regards to, I guess I had a question because I've definitely done like some research and stuff about it and like talking to people like at Netflix and just like in this tech communication world. Like I'm super passionate about how like media and the content we create can like impact culture, and specifically like, I mean, this event was perfect Nigerian culture. I really like having just almost like choosing like which stories and how certain stories can elevate the culture and also teach people. So I guess what advice do you have, or even more specifically, like what do you think Netflix is looking for to, like, I don't know, go to the next level in terms of like their content strategy? Because that's like more of like what I'm interested in, not necessarily creating the content, but like kind of working through and filtering and I guess the marketing part. There's like a lot, I don't know if that makes sense. But I think I forgot if it was Ebony or Sydney who talked about like the booking and like deciding which talent to work with and things like that. I think things like that it's really interesting to me because you can literally pick out, okay, well, this person has this community and, how can we elevate that and say something about the culture?
I unfortunately don't have a ton of insight in that arena. Because just in terms of like what I book for, it's specifically for the podcast or for like a marketing asset. And so it's more so some of the relationships that we already have with talent, if it's like a Netflix original or something. So working with the teams we have built a relationship with, in order to kind of book them on that channel that helps market the show or the movie that they're part of. But in terms of like a full scope of hiring for that particular vertical, I don't know.
And sorry, I think I just need a little more clarity on the question.
I guess, yeah, just like what, I guess, because I know you guys both have different roles at Netflix, and also too, it's kind of like, I think it was you or Sydney who mentioned it was like project based, but I guess what, like based on what you've done so far with Netflix, like what is it advice or like just what is something that you feel like Netflix needs as it's like continuing to grow as like a company?
Oh, okay. Let's see. I think ultimately, as you all know, or maybe not, we announced that we just hit like 200 million members, which is pretty crazy. And it's really exciting, but I think what we're really mapping toward is like, how can we continue to, one, like grow our members, but then also how can we create really high quality content that keeps them entertained, keeps them wanting to choose Netflix. The competitive space is massive right now versus like when we first started and we're a DVD based company. We've come a long way. And I think now the focus, especially I would say like across the board, is like, how can we get content to our members that feels tailored to their taste? Like, how can we create opportunities for creators to have their stories travel and be seen and loved by the world, but made in any specific country? And then I think in addition to that, like, how can we keep people choosing Netflix even when they have more options than they ever have to choose somewhere else? And that starts, I think, with having like high quality content, like the best of the best people in their field working here. And then more importantly, I think being very laser focused on our goals and not getting distracted by the competitive space. So hopefully that answers your question, but I think I saw another question here about like, if you apply for a role at Netflix, like how can you get noticed, how can you get hired? I do think that a big part that plays into getting a job at Netflix is not wanting it too bad, because there's a chance I remember before I got the job that I have now, I had written in my notebook, I want to work at Netflix by this stage, and this is how much money I want to make, and that's that. And I kind of just forgot about it, but I kept working. Like every job that I had, I was working from as if I was already at Netflix. So like how can you be kind of meeting the vibration of what you're asking for? How can you be proactively kind of working right now as if you do work at Netflix? Like, how could you be attracting that opportunity simply by taking advantage of what you have now? Are there places that are close enough to Netflix, but not Netflix, that you can hone your skill set and that could make you an attractive hire? And I think also, like, what is the career trajectory of the people who are hired at Netflix, and does what you are currently doing kind of match what's a fit for the role that you're applying for? So I think really navigating that and owning the fact that if you don't get a job here, it's not the end of the world. Like, I think it's honestly probably a good thing, because that means that something better is around the corner. I don't ever see any opportunity that I don't get as a missed one. I see it as getting me closer to what's actually right for me. You never know. I applied to Netflix a million times. It was the one time I didn't. I saw the role over the summer and I was like, I'm not going to get this job. It's asking for like 8 years of experience, and I'm not going to bother applying. I'm just going to continue focusing on my job at Twitter and being really good at what I'm doing now. 3 months later, they called me. I was like, I'm not going to get this job, but I'll take the interview. I had the interview. I was like, I don't know, the interview's went okay. I'm probably not going to get it, but that's fine. I'm really happy with where I'm at, and I feel like I'm growing in the role. I got the job, and I got an offer that was way different than what I had initially scoped for myself. So I think you really have to keep your journey open, not be too focused on the brand, and be more focused on the opportunity that you feel is going to help you develop and shine and grow. Because I was not ready to work here 5 years ago when I really wanted to work here. I was not ready. And sometimes I still feel like I'm not ready to be but so Cindy can relate. She knows. She works with other people here. It's tough, but I think I'm able to handle it. Whereas I wasn't in a mental space where like I was able to do the work and the internal work to really develop and be strong enough to work in an environment with other like type A high performing people. And so I think it's a long-winded way of saying, Oprah has a really great quote about this, by the way. And it's like, want it, like be true in your intention for wanting it, and then let it go. Like, keep moving. Like, don't be so married and focused to this idea of like working at X company that you lose sight of all of the other things you probably need to do to be prepared to be there in the first place. So
1,000% agree with all of that. Because even for myself, I never thought that Netflix would want me there, like in any capacity. And like I mentioned, I'm more so in like a contract role. So it's not like a full-time Netflix like in-house. But I've known and seen plenty of people who've worked there and have like weren't as prepared as they had thought they were. And so even for the expectations as a contractor, the expectations as a vendor, like they are all high. So because I never, like I want it, but I always keep myself to a very high standard of professionalism and like execution, it did eventually find me. Like weirdly, but it's because I was like, I didn't know that Netflix was going to have podcasts, right? And let alone Black podcasts. And so I was always working in the podcast space, and I was always working on like the marketing side of things. And I was always working directly with like the impact theory talent booker to understand like how my marketing strategy works with like his talent booking strategy and collaborating in that way. And all of those things lent themselves to what I do now here for all these different, like working across teams, making sure that like, you know, what is sent out is still true and still matches, and like, you know, following up and making sure that like we're hitting all the beats and all the points that needed to be done. And then also just being, again, available with a wide array of skills that allows you to be a value add, even in whatever capacity is that you're working in. Yeah, and I think I agree. Don't necessarily get married to like the brand name, and like really focus on what it is that you want to do, how you want to feel when you're doing it, and is it going to continue to fill you? Because you can quickly, just because you want to work at XYZ place, burn yourself out.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't actually what's in alignment for you, and you were ignoring like all of the really amazing things that you could possibly be doing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, ladies. Oh, sorry. But thank you so much, ladies. That was our last question. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending. We appreciate both our panelists and all of our guests for everything. And just, you know, for people who want to connect and also stay updated, if you could just, you know, post your socials, Cindy and Ebony as well, in the chat for all those people who would like to further ask more questions, get more feedback or anything, you know. And then as y'all do that, thank you so much for everything. Thank you so much for those who came, for attending, for staying throughout. If you have any feedbacks, any suggestions, any questions, or anything to say regarding tonight's event, how we can better ourselves, what we did right, what we did wrong, you can DM or email Naija.com. And once again, thank you so much. And we hope to see you again at our next event. And I hope y'all have a great night.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.